you mind? Thanks. This cleanliness is next to godliness, and today it's second nature to wash regularly and keep a clean home. We've got creams and soaps and all sorts of stuff to keep ourselves and our homes spotlessly clean from top to bottom. Steady. As ever, we take the mechanics of domestic life for granted. But these things are relatively recent arrivals to our home. They didn't just pop out of thin air. Where did they come from? Let's take a look. You can't get more basic than this, but think about what it's doing. All the infrastructure behind it. Turn on a tap, and if you'll pardon the pun, you're tapping into untold billions of pounds worth of water treatment, sewer systems, and pipework. Imagine one of these attached to one of these. This is Batings Dam in West Yorkshire. When you turn that tap on in your home, somewhere a reservoir of millions of gallons just like this one is letting out just a drop down our pipes into our homes. There's 775 million gallons out there, and that's equivalent to... it's a lot of water. My dad built this, not on his own, with 1,000 other blokes, all toiling away with picks and shovels. In actual fact, my dad drove a steam crane, and I can remember him first thing in the morning coming over here to get the coal on to build up the head of steam, just so that it would run down the railway tracks and do its building as it went along. It all sounds very Victorian, but this dam was completed just before the 60s began to swing. And that was only 20 years after running water became available in most homes throughout Britain. So go back a few centuries and you can imagine how difficult it was to keep clean. So for centuries, people didn't bother, especially in winter. The home was shut up and people were sewn into their clothes. After all, winters were much colder then than now, and they had none of our gadgets to keep themselves warm. It wasn't about comfort, they were grateful just to survive the winter. At the first sign of warmer weather, people would open up their homes for spring cleaning. That's where the phrase comes from. They'd have to. People and livestock would have been stuck inside all winter. There'd be smoke and all sorts of stenches in here. So doors and windows would be opened up to let the warm air in and the foul stench out. Then they would get out the mops and vacuum cleaner to do the cleaning, except there wouldn't have been a vacuum cleaner. It would be this, a brush. Early floor coverings were just bare earth covered in straw. The straw was there to soak up the winter waste. Instead of risking the cold, people and animals would urinate in the corner of the home. The straw was swept out as regularly as possible, but even so, homes back in the Dark Ages were basic and smelly. The reason floors were so basic wasn't just because of poverty, it was actually by royal proclamation. A royal proclamation of 1625 forbade anyone having any sort of floor other than mellow earth. Why? Because all that urine meant the floors of our homes were rich in nitrates, and nitrates are great for making gunpowder. During the Civil War, this was in short supply, so saltpetermen were charged with crossing the land to dig up the floors of houses. That's like the government barging in unannounced today to take up your carpet or your floorboards. In reality, this was a law that applied mostly to the poor. The rich tried to buy their way out of it, and they tried to buy their way out of it so much that another law forbade them from bribing or obstructing the saltpetermen. Of course, gunpowder has been useful in providing alternative floor coverings. floor tiles were an option for better-off merchants in their ilk. Even then, the tiles often got smaller the further you were from a quarry, as handling them over a distance was tricky. But if you were very rich, flooring was just another way to show your wealth. Importing Italian marble or tiles from further afield ensured the right impression. And as flooring changed, so did the ways of keeping it clean.
Get back! Come on, back, I say, back, get back!
But the introduction of carpeting pushed all other floorings into the shade.
A new floor covering spread all over the land, and for centuries this was the only way of keeping dirt at bay. And really, it's a lot like the old caveman idea of using animal skins to keep warm. Get nice and snug with your skins. You've got a membrane there with a fur on top, a fur-like material, just like the old bear skins or tiger skins or whatever. So really, nothing changes. Go on!
In the early days, carpet manufacture could be a dangerous affair. Right up until the middle of the 20th century, factories displayed anthrax warning signs, as the disease could arrive in the fleeces of sheep. These days, it's a high-tech automated process, but it's still recognisably the same as the hand loom from centuries ago.
Now, Melvin, to the modern eye, this looks like a pretty basic wooden contraption. I suppose in its day, it was something more.
Oh, it was the latest thing. I'm sure it was, yes.
Forgive my ignorance, I still see a basic knitting down at this end. What's going on there?
Oh, no, this is a proper woven carpet, for goodness sake. It's got the warp and the weft, and it's traditionally woven.
But the first carpet with a backing was Brussels carpet.
This is a piece of Brussels carpet. Now, Brussels carpet was a carpet with a looped pile, first woven in Brussels, hence the name. And this is 27 inches wide. The loom was 27 inches wide.
Right.
And that was derived from the Flemish L.
Exactly what is a Flemish L?
The Flemish L was a unit of measurement, and in fact it was approximately 27 inches. Which is where we got this carpet from, and we think it was the influence of the Flemish weavers who came over, and they brought their dimension with them.
By the end of World War II, the Flemish L was a thing of the past, as wall-to-wall carpeting took over. Wall-to-wall carpeting coincided with the widespread availability of central heating, which in turn shrank our floorboards, making our homes drafty. So we wanted wall-to-wall carpeting.
Can you remember when you got your first fitted carpet?
It was a big deal. Well, it's moving into your home, it's stamping your personality on your home, isn't it? When you choose that carpet, you choose something that's suited to you.
It was great, wasn't it? Because it was warm all over. You didn't step onto anything cold or anything like that. Well, you thought you were rich, weren't you? And when you had fitted carpet, and you got anything like that, a new carpet, or when the, television and things like that, didn't you? I am showing my age.
We've all got an age.
The new wall-to-wall carpets needed a new way of keeping them clean. You couldn't take them outside with a beater, and the answer wasn't immediately apparent.
If things had gone differently, I'd be cleaning my house with one of these, because the earliest mechanical cleaners actually blew the dirt away. But all that changed in 1901 when Englishman Hubert Cecil Booth watched a demonstration of a blower, and that gave him the idea to use suction. And to demonstrate the principle, he used a hanky, a tube, and some dirt. And what he did was this. Takes the hanky thus, puts it over the tube, and that's the birth of the vacuum cleaner, but not as we know it today. Let me show you. Off we go! The first vacuum cleaners were like this, as big as a truck. What would happen was a team of cleaners would come round to your house with a horse-drawn wagon with big hoses, put them in through your doors and your windows, and an engine on the back of the wagon would create suction and suck all that dirt right out.
And the idea actually caught on. Booth's vacuums were soon to be seen outside all the best establishments, from royal palaces to the Houses of Parliament and the best hotels. But an appliance the size of a truck was the province of the very, very wealthy.
Luckily, downsizing was just around the corner.
There were cleaning machines that used suction, but they weren't powered, like this 1908 Baby Daisy, which uses a bellows effect. A cheap and cheerful alternative, made right up until the 1930s, was this Star hand pump vacuum cleaner from 1911. But it was a man called Hoover who, in 1908, popularised the vacuum cleaner as we know it today. However, they should be called Spanglers, as Mr. Hoover bought the patent from an asthmatic caretaker called Spangler, who invented the machine to help his work. Nonetheless, Hoover is the name that stuck. So did their mantra, beats as it sweeps as it cleans. Where Hoover led, others followed, and soon models like this Goblin were jumping on the bandwagon. To try and differentiate, this one could be taken apart and worn on the arm, not as a fashion accessory, but to clean curtains. It took over half a century for vacuum technology to change significantly. In 1993, the first of a new breed of vacuum cleaner, the revolutionary, or should I say cyclonic, Dyson appeared. It had no bag, which meant no loss of suction, however much dirt it collected. Maybe this mantra is set to replace "it beats as it sweeps as it cleans" as the vacuuming catchphrase for the new millennium. How times have changed. Can I interest you in a vacuum cleaner story? Good. Like most household appliances, vacuum cleaners were originally sold door to door, and an enterprising salesman thought he'd struck gold when he did a demonstration at the Royal Mint. Let me show you. His demonstration was the most thorough he'd ever given. The officials looked on as their bullion room was swept clean, and they were so impressed that the canny salesman was halfway out of the door with his vacuum full of gold dust before they stopped him. Mind you, he's still cleaned up. But dust is more often full of other things, like dust mites. Our homes are full of unseen enemies that we'd run a mile from if we could see them. They eat the dried skin that flakes off us, which is good, because as it is, skin makes up around a quarter of the dust in a vacuum cleaner bag, and that's in today's modern clean homes. Imagine how bad things were before we had plumbing and electricity.
What about sanitation? To say it was rudimentary would be overstating things. Frankly, it was as basic as it could get. Gardy low! Gardy low, watch out for the water. That's what you would shout when you're emptying your chamber pot. Some people reckon that's where we got the word loo from. Low, loo.
But where did our loos come from? Most people think they were invented by the infamous Thomas Crapper, but he was only one of many who contributed to the evolution of the lavatory. So why has his name stuck?
Well, we always like to associate one individual with each sort of major invention, I suppose. But it's not true to say that he invented the loo, and no one man did actually invent the loo. It developed over many years. But Mr. Crapper, I suppose, promoted it better than anyone else.
Now this seat takes me right back to my childhood on the Pennines with the old outside toilet. That's what it is, isn't it?
This is the most basic type of loo you can get, really, the privy. A little house at the bottom of the garden, a basic board with perhaps another board in front of it to cover it up, and underneath nothing more than a pit.
And what about this instrument of torture you've got there then? What does that do?
Well, this is an original long-handled ladle for removing the contents of the pit. It was someone's unfortunate job, usually father's I suppose, to every 6 to 12 months or whenever it was filled up.
Oh, as often as that?
Oh yes, and then dig a big hole in an unused part of the garden and bury it all.
It's a giant pooper scooper, really.
It certainly is.
This valve lavatory was introduced in the late 1700s.
Now tell me about this one then. This is a riot of technology, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's a valve closet. And although it looks very strange to have all this exposed stuff, it would be panelled in. You'd have a lovely piece of polished wood along the front there, polished wood on top, with holes in it to expose that handle and the bowl here. And it works on a valve principle in that when you pull the handle up, inside the bottom of the loo drops away. The water and all its contents whoosh down the plug hole. At the same time, it's opened this cold water valve. It would start the whole thing working, and then this air chamber on the side would let the handle return slowly back to rest, cutting off the water and closing off the bottom of the loo again.
I mean, that seems quite sophisticated, and it seems like we've got the germ of the modern toilet there, but it's not the same principle as we're familiar with today, is it?
It isn't, no. In fact, it's overcomplicated. It's a wonderful piece of engineering, but it's desperately over-engineered and overcomplicated, and that's really why they finally went out, because they were too expensive to make and too expensive to maintain.
But they were made right up until the Second World War.
Because the aristocracy preferred them. They had got used to these valve closets, and they considered the Victorian ideal of the exposed, decorated loo pan, or the loo pan like we have today, dreadfully middle class. It was nouveau riche at the time to have an exposed pan, so the aristocracy continued with these. And still, in stately homes up and down the country, there are these wonderful valve closets, and Buckingham Palace indeed has a selection of them as well. The trap, of course, was...
By the middle of the 19th century, the potters of Stafford had worked out how to make a lavatory entirely in porcelain.
That's the shape, isn't it?
Yes.
That does say loo, doesn't it? That says toilet.
It certainly does. That's correctly called the trap. Lots of people call them the U-bend. But full of water, and it's always full of water, and it stops the sewer gases from coming up into the room.
Now that's a great little solution, really, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I mean, this later developed into the loo as we know it today.
Soon the pan was in one piece and no longer hidden behind panelling. One beautifully patterned model followed another.
So how did they test new models?
They would have a variety of ways of testing them. The main thing was to flush away as much bits and pieces they could find. Of course, they couldn't test it with the real thing. So this one, for example, was very famous. It won an award at the 1884 Health Exhibition for successfully flushing away no fewer than 10 small apples, a large flat sponge, a load of plumber's smudge, whatever that was, coated all over the inside of the bowl.
Charming.
Yeah. And the whole lot was flushed away in one go.
And it wasn't just the lavatories that were changing. Until Thomas Crapper, salesmen had relied on brochures and perfect miniatures to sell their wares. But all that changed in the late 1800s.
Thomas Crapper may not have invented the loo, but he did invent the bathroom showroom, and that did away with the need for little sales miniatures like this. What he did was rip the sash windows out of his Chelsea shop, put in big plate glass windows, and stack the windows with full-sized lavatories. And think of the shock value that made ladies faint in the streets. After all, this was the 1870s, and it offended Victorian sensibilities, and maybe Thomas Crapper brought the water closet out of the closet.
In the changing face of hygiene, shaving has been a high priority for men ever since the arrival of the cutthroat. But these lethal weapons needed constant stropping to stay sharp. The hunt was on for the disposable safety razor.
In order to get a piece of steel suitable to make a disposable blade, you've got to get it thin enough.
But this was hard work, and steel technology was still too basic to deliver the finished product.
and it's turned into lace work. It's far too ragged to be a razor blade. The disposable safety razor was invented by an American, King Camp Gillette. What a great name. And he invented it in 1895. And he was a bit ahead of his time because it took another 8 years before technology caught him up and he could mass produce these.
When these made it into the shops, they couldn't make them quickly enough. The first year they sold just 51, but the next year 90,000 were sold, and by 1908 sales passed 1 million. And with numbers like that, it's little wonder that other couldn't resist, of the action. So they came up with their own ways of securing the blade. My favourite is the Schick, which was inspired by the magazines on repeating rifles in the 1920s.
These days, the whole razor's disposable.
Electricity was also in on the act. The first ones appeared before World War II. They were ungainly and needed a big motor, but they caught on immediately and another market was born. Perhaps the most basic ingredient of personal hygiene is soap, but from 1712 to 1853, a soap tax made it a luxury. Cleanliness just wasn't high on the agenda.
So what is soap made from? Well, once upon a time it would have been made from animal fats, like this, lard. Sounds nasty. But today it's more likely to be made from vegetable fat or oil, like that. Back in the old days, lye would have been extracted from wood ash by dripping water through it. But today, we're more likely to use sodium hydroxide. Quite a nasty stuff, really. That's why I've got gloves and glasses on. This is quite caustic.
And that's the stuff, when mixed with fat to dilute it, that dissolves the dirt on our skin so we can wash it away.
And at the end of the process, we add perfumes or essential oils that make it acceptable to smear ourselves with fat. These make it smell nice. But right at the end, we pour all that into a mould, and at that point, it's still rather caustic. It will take the fat out of your skin. So it's got to be left for a few weeks. But it's that causticity which actually cleans us.
Soap originally was advertised, the one bar could clean everything, so you could do the washing up with it, you do your dishes, scrub the floor, do your laundry, and even shampoo your hair. Some of them say they'll do the whole lot. And then we started changing the formulas, and they just carried on from there and separated it out, and cleaning products just became much more refined for the type of work they had to do.
Where does soap do most of its work? In the bath. But it took a very special advocate for bathing to catch on.
Now, there's bound to be some strange royalty stories in cleanliness.
Yes, aren't there always? Elizabeth I apparently was a very clean queen, and she had a bath every month whether she needed it or not, apparently.
So there's Elizabeth I having a regular once-a-month bath. What's that like to me doing that?
Well, her courtiers were only having a bath once a year, if that, and many of her subjects would not even think of having a bath at all.
Over the next 300 years, bathing may have become more routine, but it was still basic.
People only bathe twice a year. Apart from it being a lot of hard work, they didn't see the need. They didn't equate cleanliness with healthiness. And anyway, full immersion in water was treated with suspicion. The bath only comes up to here, so the rest was done like this.
The water that you would have actually bathed in was more like, well, dirty river water, and I mean, how many people would want to get into that anyway and fully immerse yourself in not particularly clean water to start with?
But bath time soon became a regular feature in the household.
Now, I remember using the tin bath, Who did the drawing of water and filling the bath?
The women and children. Generally speaking, it happened once a week, and the whole family, sort of one after the other, got in. So the water at the end, if you were the youngest, which I think it generally went eldest to youngest, if you were the youngest, I think you really were in some quite murky water by the end.
These baths were used right up until the middle of the 20th century. But the days were numbered ever since the spread of plumbing in the 1890s.
And when plumbing and water companies actually started coming into force, you actually got the change and people began to have a bath in their houses. It was plumbed in, cold water, hot water, and then as they did get used to using it, when they actually had friends who then didn't bathe, they began to notice the smell, because when you're all in the same smell together, I don't think it's as noticeable. But once you've got certain friends who do wash a lot and certain friends who don't, then it became much more obvious. And I think then sort of society pressure was on people to start keeping themselves cleaner.
By Victorian times, people were beginning to campaign for better cleanliness, and it was the rich who first picked up on this trend. And I mean rich. This sort of bath was only affordable to the posh and becks of the Victorian world. It would have been around £90, the price of a small house in those times. But look at all this stuff just plumbing to us, but at the time this was quite high tech. Big manifold under here to mix all the taps and all the hot and cold water. Let's have a go. We've got cold water there, a bit of hot water there, and here we've got another device that... and it's a shower. That's magical. That was a magical thing in Victorian times. All this structure all around. It's a shower and it's cold. Oh, this is the life of luxury. What a design. All the pipes are built into this frame all around. I'm getting all these jets of water coming all over me. It's quite an elegant design. It looks elegant, but it's elegant in its solution. Now, we can take this for granted today. Everybody's got showers almost. But this was high tech. This is fabulously different and architectural almost. It's a complete water environment. This is cleanliness. It feels I've arrived and I'm clean.
At last, cleanliness had a home, as a new room appeared in the house, the bathroom. And soon, designers were coming up with new ways of creating luxury in the bathroom. The whirlpool bath was invented in the 50s by Candido Jacuzzi in order to relieve rheumatic pain.
But they were perfected in the 60s and they quickly became a lifestyle accessory.